Okay, I think probably a good idea to get started, and I guess other people can join us as and when. Okay, so just to say thank you so much for signing up for the second of the series of shared parenting webinars. And our international tour has reached Sweden, which is the land of shared parenting. In subsequent sessions, we'll travel to the Netherlands, Israel, Canada, and the United States to hear of the changes that have been introduced in these countries and to consider whether they would work in Scotland or not. We are very grateful to the Scottish law firm Harper and MacLeod, who have sponsored this series on the basis that will be invaluable for practitioners in the field of family law to really understand what other jurisdictions are doing to improve and protect the well-being of children and parents living as separated families. All the sessions will be recorded and made available on our website with links to background information, and we will send copies out of today's PowerPoint after the session. So a little bit about Shared Parenting Scotland. We're hosting the session today. We're doing two main things. First of all, is a lot of activity that we do. We have helplines, local meetings, we have a website, publications, WhatsApp groups, and a full comprehensive suite of training programs that are all intended to support separated families, fathers and mothers, and other members who contact us. Our other objective is to campaign for better support for separated parents and their children, to help them deal with the consequences of separation and to keep both parents fully involved in their children as much as possible. Children's Scotland Act and Family Justice Modernisation Strategy, once they are actually implemented, will make some positive changes in Scotland. But we believe that far more fundamental transformation is required to take much of the dispute resolution out of the courts and provide support more quickly and less expensively, and above all, to put the interests and the needs of children at the very heart of matters. So that is why we're looking at Sweden today, to find out some reasons why shared parenting is so popular in that country, and a little bit more about the outcomes for children in shared care. Let's use the questions and discussion this afternoon to explore these possibilities. So our main speaker today is Malin Bergstrom. Malin is a child psychologist and scientist in the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, which is consistently ranked amongst the world's best medical schools. Malin is going to tell us about the research she has conducted on outcomes in children and young people in various family types. Her project goes under the wonderful name of Elvis. I guess that's E-L-V-I-S, but I'll leave her to explain why that name was used. Looking her up on Wikipedia, we noted that Malin's doctoral thesis was on psychoprophylactics during childbirth by both mothers and fathers. Since then, she has focused on issues rather later in life of children, but she still looks on the impact on fathers and mothers. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you can please use the Q&A to post any questions that you might have while Malin is giving her presentation, and any comments that you might have as well, so that we don't lose them. And then we'll cover them after the response with myself and Ian Maxwell, who is the National Manager at Shared Parenting Scotland, but is now very internationally sitting in Edinburgh Airport, I think. So Malin, over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'll try and share my screen and do my very best to explain why we use the name Elvis for our project. We also have a wonderful, is this okay? Do you see things properly?
Yes.
Yeah. In Swedish, shared parenting arrangements is called växelvis boende, which is alternate residency or something like that in English. And when we were to decide on a name for our project more than 10 years ago, my colleague Emma Fransson, who is also a scientist and a child psychologist, she made this play with the words, växelvis boende, and within växelvis we have Elvis. So since then it's the Elvis Project. And I'm going to talk about some of the results we've seen in our project, and I'm also going to talk about the situation in Sweden a bit, and then I'll be open to questions, of course. The aim of our project has been to study children's situation in shared parenting arrangements, and we have compared these children, the outcomes of these children, with children who live in nuclear families, who live mostly with the mother, mostly with the father, or only with the mother or the father. So it's been rather a simple layout of this, a simple design of these studies. And honestly, I don't really know how many studies we've published, but maybe 20 or something. I've written a book for parents about it, and I've been lecturing a lot about these results. And we started out focusing on school-aged children and teenagers, because as you might guess, it's easier to study older children because they can respond themselves to questions. But we have also managed to include younger children from, in one study from age 2, but in some other studies from age 3 years. So there is still a lack of knowledge, at least from Sweden, regarding the youngest. And I have some hope that we will be able to at least study children at 18 months of age further down the lane. But that is what we've been up to. And I was thinking before coming here today or meeting with you I was thinking about how this project made me realize that Sweden is different from other countries, because I was brought up by a mother and a father who were equally involved in parenting. And my children's father had the same type of upbringing. And when we had kids, our fathers, the grandfathers of our children, were engaged in their grandchildren, and so on. So for me, this was a tradition over the generations with involved fathers, and that was something that I just took for granted. But I realized that this is something that may be more likely to happen in the Scandinavian countries rather than everywhere in the world. And I have used this picture for, I think, like 20 years when I've been presenting things, because I think this is what it is about, early engagement. And with everything that brings about being an involved parent when you just have had a little baby, it means your clothes will become dirty. You will have little spit on your shoulders, and you will be a bit tired. And that type of involvement inside you will bring about the changes we now know from neuroscience that actually happens in the brain when you become emotionally touched by your little child. And that if that happens to fathers, we will see shared parenting both within intact families and when parents separate or divorce. And when I was young, we had this promotion of it was about a gender neutral parental leave law that came about in the early 1970s. And they had this campaign promoting how masculine it was to be an involved father. So this is what I grew up with, pictures like this on the buses and in the subway. And since then we have kept these regulations around our parental leave that promotes a symmetrical family model. And now it is 480 days of publicly financed parental leave, and that is divided between the two parents, 240 days per parent. And since we still have an asymmetrical family life here, as in other places, we have dedicated 3 months to each parent. So they are not transferable, to make fathers stay at home with their children. And in 2020, 30% of the parental leave was used by fathers. And despite this new election and some surprises for us that we had now in September, we still have general political strivings for increased gender equality in parenthood. And when we have, in a few of our studies, we interviewed parents of young children. Their children were between 1 and 4 years of age, and they were in equal shared parenting arrangements. And when I talk about shared parenting, that is what I mean, that it's a 50-50 share between the parents. And what we could see in these interviews is how deeply rooted within Swedish parents these policies are. One father of an 18-month-old child said it was an ideology from the start that both parents should be equally important. And then when they split up, it was just a natural consequence for them that the child was moving between the parents' homes on an equal basis. And one mother said that one cannot make a lifelong commitment to always be neighbors, but we kind of have the ambition to at least live nearby, especially when he's older. And when we look, this is a really stupid picture, really, but I will try to talk you through it. If you look at the gray upper band in this diagram and the orange one below the gray one, these are representing great distance between parents' homes. So the gray indicates that it's 50 kilometers or more between the homes, and the orange one 10 to 49 kilometers. So it's still not huge distances. But as you can see, from 1970 until 2012, these bands are more narrow. So the trend is that parents tend to live closer to each other after a separation, which is, of course, in line with the need for children to be able to travel between the homes. And I think concrete practices like this is what both what happens when this shared parenting becomes a norm, but also something that it's making good shared parenting arrangements possible for families. And if we look at contemporary childhood in Sweden, it's also, I think this also contributes to the view that fathers should be involved in early on in parenting. And I mean, as it might be in Scotland, but women work here, they are part of the labor market. And we have a general daycare for children between age 1 and 5 years, where 87% of the children participate. So children are looked after, and you can still work when they're young. And if they become ill, which is the downside of having them in daycare when they're young, because their immune systems aren't really up to it. So parents have to stay at home a lot when they're young. And you could do that in Sweden until children are 13 years of age. And 60% of these care for sick child days are used by mother and 40% by fathers. And what I said when I started off about being engaged as a parent, I think as being a child psychologist, I don't think attachment and bonding for parents or parental sensitivity, it doesn't come from any strange place. It comes from something so ordinary as taking care of your child and doing it yourself, not looking over the shoulder of the other parent, but being there, supporting and comforting your child when the child is upset. That is what brings around these changes in us that makes us sensitive to children's needs. And if we look, if we go over to the separated families in Sweden, we have, this is from a study that we made a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, but it's a total population survey, so I still use it. This figure represents 12 and 15-year-old children, and 11% of the children at that time only lived with their mother and 2% only with their father. So 87% of our children lived with both their parents in one way or another, but that's how it looked. So that's what the majority of children are used to. And I honestly don't know how these figures look today. Maybe it's even a larger share that live with both parents. And we had an increase in shared parenting after a change in our family law in 1998. And as I have understood it, it was the ability for the court to decide on shared parenting against the will of one of the parents that really brought the change. Because if mothers said no to shared parenting before 1998, they couldn't decide on it. Then it was single care. But this really made a difference here. And we also know from other countries, Belgium, for example, that this has been the case. Maybe also, no, I thought I was going to say Israel, but I think that is wrong. I know about Belgium at least. And so if we stay with the parents for a while, this is from a study we made with parents of Swedish children, 1,400 parents, and we looked at their satisfaction in different areas of their life. How satisfied are you with your housing, your work situation, your economy, your health, your family type, your social network, and your ability to influence your life? And as you can see, parents in nuclear families are the most satisfied in almost all aspects except for social networking. And JPC is what I use continuously as a caption for shared parenting, because when we write about this, we always use the term joint physical custody, but that is the same as equal shared parenting. But if you look at this, you see that parents with their children every second week in shared parenting, they are about as satisfied or just slightly less satisfied with their life situation as parents in nuclear families. So I think that contributes to the popularity of this practice, and it contributes to the results of our studies and others' studies on children. Because what we have found in our project is consistently positive results for children in shared parenting. And I will just give you a brief presentation of these, but this is how it has looked, regardless of outcome and regardless of age of the child. We can see some differences between really young children and older children, but I will come back to that. And before I look into that, I would just say something about that I think may contribute to explain these positive results of children who keep everyday contact with both their parents after the separation. Because when we think about what a parental separation is for children, is that it may be loss of resources. And these resources could be in parenting, for example. And we know from lots of studies that being a single mom is hard, because you both have to set boundaries and you have to be there emotionally for your child, and you have to bring home the money. So it's a difficult situation, and it's hard on single mothers' health, both physically and mentally. It is also difficult for fathers who lose contact with their children. And you may think that this would not affect children because they are happy where they are, but children, as you all know, tend to be very loyal to their parents and may worry about the one that they lose everyday contact with, and may instead end up with fantasies about what his life is like now, and a sense of loss in themselves. And of course, a negative consequence that is sometimes argued to be a risk for children in shared parenting is when parents have long-lasting conflict, and that it may affect children more if they live with both parents and the parents have to make arrangements and agree on things together. I mean, we haven't seen this in our studies, but it's still something that we know is detrimental to children's health. And I would say it doesn't really matter maybe how the child lives, because I think these conflicts will still be part of their psychological environment and thus be hurtful for them. It's also a matter of something as of material resources. And we know that parents bring about not only economy into their children's lives, but also personal resources, like what is my parenting style? Do I complement the other parent, my co-parent? What type of interests do I have that I may introduce the child to, and stuff like this. So there are lots of things that children may lose, lots of resources that children may lose when parents separate, if they lose contact with one of them. And it doesn't have to be to lose contact, but to lose everyday contact, because parenting is not worth much if it isn't a parenting that means involvement in children's lives. I mean, knowing the names of children's friends or being engaged in their sports or whatever other activities they have, that is the parenting that really counts. And also structure, providing food and making children wake up in the morning and get away and stuff like that. And before I say something about our studies, I just wanted to say that, I mean, there are so many talented researchers that look into this. And Sondre Asen Nielsen in Norway presented his doctoral thesis 2 years ago in Norway on adolescents in shared parenting arrangements. And he reached the same conclusions as we have reached in our project. And after that, we have also published together a study on sleep in adolescents in different family types, and found outcomes that support shared parenting. And I thought sleep was quite an interesting thing, because of course you might think that stress and how you sleep would be affected by moving 52 times a year. And then I come back to the 3 total population studies that we have done in our project with a lot of children who were 12 and 15 years old. And in one of the studies, we looked at stress, or as we call it in research, psychosomatic symptoms, and it was 8 different symptoms on how children felt emotionally, how their sleep was, if they had headaches or belly aches, or felt tense in the body and stuff like that. And you can see here, JPC is, as I said, the shared parenting, the joint physical custody. And you can see that children in shared parenting had slightly more stress than those in nuclear families, but significantly less stress than those who lived mostly with one parent or in single care. And I think maybe this is one of the most important studies that we have done, because it shows that stress for children may be losing one parent or lack of one parent, rather than the stress of the logistics of having to move houses frequently, which is the case for children in the JPC, the 15% here. And this is another slide from the studies of the total population of 12 and 15-year-olds. And this was a very nice outcome of health-related quality of life that included lots of aspects of children's lives. And you can see here that children in nuclear families or in shared parenting, they had to a very low extent reduced well-being, why it was more common among children who lived mostly or only with one parent. And then I can go on. This is the risk increase in mental health problems in children in these ages, and the difference here between children in nuclear and shared parenting families is minimal, while those who live only with one parent have a 30% risk increase in mental health issues, which is a lot. This is another sample. I think this was 5,000 children between age 10 and 17 years. And we looked on their relations to their mothers, their fathers, and to their classmates in school. And also here you can see that the differences between children, the blue bands are children in nuclear families or who live with 2 custodial parents. And the green ones are shared parenting or shared residence. And we couldn't find any significant differences between children in these 2 family types, while those who lived with only one parent had, to a lower extent, good relationships with their mothers or fathers or friends in school. And it's interesting or sad to see that, because most of these children, the yellow in the yellow staples, they were living with their mothers, but this relationship was to a higher extent under pressure. Maybe because what I said before, that it is difficult to be a single parent with all the responsibility that brings along. If I go over to the studies we have done on preschoolers, we did first one study on slightly less than 3,000 Nordic 2 to 9-year-olds. We have made a study on slightly more than 3,500 Swedish 3 to 5-year-olds, and one study with a lot of 3-year-olds. And in all these studies, we found the same pattern in our results. Children in shared parenting, they fare better than those who live mostly or only with one parent. And I think that is interesting because they are so young. And we have a tendency to think that the mother may be more important for really young children. But no, that was not the case. And let me see, in maybe all three or at least two of those studies, there was no difference in mental health problems or well-being, as one may rather say when it's young children like this, between those who lived in intact nuclear families or in shared parenting. So to a lower extent, we have found troubles in really young children in shared parenting arrangements rather than in older ones. And I want to point out, before I say something more about these studies on the preschoolers, I want to say something about these studies. We have made one longitudinal study on children in shared parenting, and it's really valuable to be able to do longitudinal studies because then you can rule out lots of differences. And we couldn't really in that study see any differences between children who lived mostly or only with one parent or in shared parenting. But I think other bias may have be attached to that study. But in the studies I have presented now, I just want to point out that we can't talk about effects on children of shared parenting. We can't talk about causal relationships. We talk about associations. And it might be that, I don't know how it is in Scotland, you can tell me later, but it might be that families in different socioeconomic situations are prone to different family types after a divorce. And in Sweden, it's been like before, middle class families have chosen shared parenting, and families with a lower socioeconomic status have more had single motherhood after a separation, and children have lost contact with their father. So this may bias the results. Also, the family relations. We know that parents who parent well together, who have a good co-parenting relationship, they tend to decide on shared parenting. It may also be so because you tend to divorce more easily if you have a child with mental health problems or a handicap or something like that. And so some of these child problems may have been existing before the divorce and just continued to affect family situation. And also among children who live in single care with only the mother, that might be due to parental malfunctioning in the father. I mean, he may be lost due to a dependency or psychiatric disease or something like that. And that, of course, also affects children's well-being, even if they don't live with him anymore. So, and I just want to say something about co-parenting, and then I will say something about what I do today to contribute to a good co-parenting relationship for Swedish parents. And then I will welcome Claire's response and your questions. But an 11-year-old girl made us this drawing, or she suggested this drawing to explain what co-parenting is about. It's about swinging a child between you and your co-parent in a nice way. And when we go to theory, co-parenting involves the aspects of parenting and not the partner or the love relationship between the parents. And lots of research has have shown us that it is the parenting aspects that affects children. The love relationship or the partner relationship between the parents is not very important to children's well-being. And the co-parenting relationship, there are some aspects that might be particularly important for children's health, and that is whether parents support or undermine each other's parenting, if they can match their parental roles and views on how children should be raised. It's how easily they can agree on the distribution of household tasks and responsibilities for children and who does what at home. And then an aspect that I am particularly interested in, the confidence in each other and the confidence in each other as parents. And I think that is really important when children are young, because we know from research that during the first hours of a child's life, parents may end up in roles where mothers tell fathers what the child needs and how he should behave as a parent. And I think that is something that may become a rolling stone and contribute to a lower self-confidence in fathers and a better self-confidence in mothers. And then we have the aspect of handling of conflicts, which is of course really important because this is the first close relationship that influence children's lives, the one between the two parents. And what we saw in our study of over 13,000 3-year-olds in Sweden was that whether these children lived in an intact family, in a shared parenting arrangement, mostly with the mother or only with the mother, was less important to children's well-being than the quality of the parental relationship. And we also saw that children fared better if parents separate and have children in shared parenting rather than stay together and have a low quality co-parenting relationship. So I think this was a really important aspect of when we discuss shared parenting, that co-parenting and the quality of this relationship is really important to children's well-being and health. And we also know that, as I said, we don't make studies, we don't study effects on children's life. And we know that high co-parenting quality predicts shared parenting in a family. And we know that paternal early engagement also predicts co-parenting quality. So these are factors that I find particularly important because we could influence them as professionals. And to remind parents that you are always a family, regardless of how this family is structured and who lives with the child when. So finally, I just want to say something about an app or an application that I work with since a few years now, because we have seen in Sweden that we have support for parents who separate, and a small proportion also go to court and fight over custody. But we don't have a lot of support for parents who are early in this process and with a really clean focus on what is good for children. So we have developed this app in Swedish, and it's called Varannan vecka, and my colleagues are now translating it into English. So we will, if anyone is interested, you can contact Ian in a month or so, and there will be an English version. And we think that in this whirlwind that a separation brings along, it is important to get help to focus on the child's needs because it's so easy to lose it when you have so many things to think about. And in our app, you could invite everyone who is important to the child. It's not for mothers and fathers, but everyone who is important for children could be part of a co-parenting relationship. And of course, we have things like this calendar, or we have what I'm most proud of is the I don't know what you call it. It's in the chat. You get help not to be rude to each other. Someone will the technique will stop you if you use abusive language. So I think that is really good. And the focus here is entirely on co-parenting, and that is why I have chosen to work with it. So this was about what I was planning to say. Thank you. And if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to email me.
Malin, I just wanted, one little question was whether COVID caused any problems to shared parenting in Sweden. And for us at Shared Parenting Scotland, we had lots of helpline inquiries during COVID about whether children can move between households.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know about children who were stuck in one home. It was absolutely awful when families were affected. I mean, in general, we didn't have a lockdown, and children could still go to school and to preschool, but certain communities tended to keep their children at home. And I know especially about children in shared parenting who had to stay in one family because they were ill.
Yeah, I think it was quite a challenging time for shared parenting, and particularly in Britain, where the rules were changing quite from 1 week to the next. It was particularly difficult, I have to say, probably here.
And it was difficult for children's relationship overall, because they didn't get to see their older relatives.
Well, anyway, I would just like to say thank you so much for your really fascinating presentation, inspiring, I have to say. And I just want to say to the participants, if you can remember to put your questions and comments in the Q&A, and once we get through our response, then we'll invite people on the screen actually to put their points in question, if that's okay with people. So just remember to be doing that. And I think now Ian and I are going to give a response to your fantastic presentation. Ian, do you want me to kick off? Yeah, I'll kick off, and because Ian's in a very busy airport at the moment, so if we have got time, if he finds a bit of quiet, then maybe he can add to the comments. So as you can see, I mean, from Malin's presentation, the UK and Scotland, we don't have anywhere near the same levels of shared parenting happening here at all, so we're quite far behind in that respect. And in Scotland, some other factors really contribute to that. And one of the main things is the split between the Scottish government and the UK government. So things like childcare is the responsibility of the Scottish government, whereas things like parental leave and child maintenance are still controlled by Westminster. So to avoid making a political point about that, we would say that it would be much more desirable to actually have all of these factors under one government, so they're clearly coming from one place, and there's a much more joined up approach. Parental leave in the UK is still far poorer than many countries, and this applies particularly to the incentives or allocated funding that can be used by fathers during the early months of the children's lives. And we've just heard from you, Malin, how important it is to make that kind of initial kind of bonding. So if we could make it easier for fathers to have lots of time looking after their children right from the start, it would make involving shared parenting long-term much easier after separation. So when the Children's Scotland Act was revised in 2020, Shared Parenting Scotland, we tried really hard to get a rebuttal presumption of shared care into Scottish law. So that's very similar to what you've had in Sweden, and also similar to the Belgian government as well. So after doing that, you can see very clearly in both countries, you have a greater uptake in shared parenting. But changing the law, as you were saying, isn't necessarily such a major factor as we can see in Sweden. It's really the social attitudes that make the roles of fathers and mothers after separation, and that's what makes the kind of major difference, we think. And since shared parenting started in 2010, we've seen a shift in Scotland, with separated fathers finding it a bit easier either to negotiate sharing with their ex, and sheriffs are a little bit more likely to make shared parenting orders in court. But we still have a long, long way to go in that respect, actually, we really do. So I think one key factor that we can't really control, but can certainly make use of, is the behavior of the media, social media, examples with celebrities when they separate, which there's a lot of people that are very interested in that. And although the tabloid press, and particularly the tabloid press in the UK, really loves it when these split ups result in furious messes and battles and drama, there does seem to be a recent trend for the news stories to be about how some celebrities or key people manage to share the care of their children. And we should be celebrating those good examples, because that obviously people are pulling that kind of information from those kind of peoples. And we were also talking about there's new episodes on the Crown that's coming on in later on in the autumn, which show which include a lot of messy details about the split between the now King Charles and Lady Diana Spencer. And we should remember that those children did have what amounted to shared care between the two of them, however much that's had an effect on them as adults. So we were also thinking maybe we should be thinking about seeking a royal patron, maybe asking one of the brothers, I don't think they probably speak to us both at the same time, obviously, but maybe that they would be interested in voicing about this issue. I mean, they've been very sort of vocal in their response to mental health issues in this country and further, so quite interesting. So we plan as shared parenting to do a lot more work on publicizing the views of children and young people about their experience in shared care. We did a small survey last year that was done by one of our interns, which was the impacts of shared parenting on young adults, including those who wished that they could have had it after their parents split. So that piece of work definitely highlighted that. And we know that shared parenting is not an easy thing to do. And even when parents agree on what is best for the children. So one of the things that shared parenting is really focusing on the moment is through our sort of training program, where we really do get parents to look at the fact that separating stirs up these very difficult emotions, but actually you need to have a clear head exactly when you're splitting up and looking after your kids. So some of the training that we do is actually really about managing those emotions and actually creating positive dialogue between parents. That is quite difficult when maybe the odds are stacked against the non-residential parent. And then then we also put a lot of emphasis around developing respect, attention, empathy, really looking at in the minutiae about actually how you communicate with an ex, that you're not going back into the sort of pathological patterns of your previous relationship, but that you are putting your children first and foremost. And that is not an easy thing to do. So sometimes it requires maybe higher levels of education and greater communication skills, as well as, you were saying about middle class families may be more likely to do shared parenting, because also, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of need, they also have things in place like, they can pay for the electricity bills or the food bills. So, so that there's more room to be able to actually really concentrate on those sort of communication pathways. So we will be in the future providing a lot more information and practical support for parents. Our numbers are increasing every month of people coming forward and wanting that kind of support. And we are very pleased to be able to offer lots of information that Varan Veka is providing, as you said earlier. And we've had a look at the materials and they're really fantastic. And in English, not in Swedish, because the British are very bad at learning second languages, unlike yourselves. And we've already discussed this collaboration moving forward, and we will putting the first articles on our website really, really soon. So I think that's probably mainly our response. Ian, I don't know whether you can add anything to that, or it's still pretty noisy in the airport. I think it's probably still quite asked to unmute. Can we unmute? No, I think we're maybe going to have some technical problems with that, but that's fine. So I think really the next stage is to really look at the Q&A. And I'm just wondering if people want to come forward. We've got 6 questions. And the first one is from now, excuse me, we have quite a lot of international guests. So just excuse me if I'm pronouncing people's names wrong, okay? So the first one is Leonard Koiser. And I'm wondering, Leonard, if you would want to actually pose your question live. And Fraser, who's on our sort of technical guy, can you make that happen? So Leonard, you're on the screen. And
yes, thank you.
Welcome, Leonard. Hi. First point, please.
Yes, I was just wondering, you know, here a lot of cases end up in court. So, and in many cases, court experts are involved. And now the court says there is a lot of lack of court experts, and we can't proceed. We can't go on faster. So the cases are open for 3 years, for example, and it is not acceptable for me. So I wanted to know how things are going in Sweden. How many court experts, if there any, are involved in court cases after divorce. So I don't really think that my question fits in this conversation. I don't know, maybe.
I mean, in Sweden, those court experts, as you call them, they would be social workers. And I think the reason for a lower proportion of Swedish parents going to court is that you don't have a lot to win economically or financially on going to court. I mean, that's ruled out. It's so being a single care mother won't bring any money in Sweden, really. So I think that is an important point about this. And I mean, I don't want to put Sweden as the paradise of child parenting, because it isn't. We struggle with lots of stuff. And I think we would need child psychologists to a higher extent. And we have also had an attitude among judges that children under age 3 years shouldn't be in equal shared parenting arrangements. We have worked a lot on that. And I think now there is a different situation, but I think it's something you have to struggle with all the time to point out, to teach child psychology or attachment theory.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the next question that I've got on the list is from Joan Cloth Zanart. Joan, I wonder if you want to just say a little bit about what you've put into the Q&A. Hi, Joan. Welcome.
Hi. Whoops. Hang on. I'm trying to get it to unmute. Did it unmute? Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Good. All right. So, one, interestingly, many years ago, in Washington, D.C., and God, please forgive me for not remembering who presented it. There was somebody from Sweden who came and presented at the divorce court conference. And you guys really kind of gave us information that we needed back then, which was great. So now I've been working on something, and I'd love to get it to the panelists or anybody who wants to weigh in on it. Something I've been working on called Common Sense 101. It's basically based off of the common sense of, if we don't allow it in an intact family or a family where there's no custodial issues, then why are we allowing it in a high custody conflict case? It doesn't make sense. If a child isn't allowed to be, for example, rude, nasty, and disown a parent in an intact family, why are we allowing it in a divorced family? But there's 12 of these common sense things, and I would love to pass it on to people so they can give me some feedback, in particular, how to say some of these things so we're not pissing the judges off when we use it.
Joan, can I just come back to you on that? What we can do is you can send us a copy of that document.
Absolutely.
Then we can, I'm very happy to send it out to the participants on this, so that we can give you feedback on the document. Malin,
would
you
love that. I would love that. How do I get it to you? Oh, you know what? There's an I need an email address, definitely.
Well, I think the thing is that we've got your email address.
Oh, that's even better.
So what we'll do is we will get in contact with you, and then you can send the document out and we can make sure that that's shared.
Thank you. And by the way, I recognize some of the statistical data that was shared because it was also presented, God, this must be 10 years ago now at the Divorce Corp conference.
Yeah, and I'm already seeing actually that other people on the group meeting are interested in seeing your document. So I will definitely make sure that that's passed around afterwards.
Also, we have some other one-pager shared parenting that ISCP put together. I will also include those.
That's fantastic, Joan. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to Dagmar. And I think it's Dagmar Kopnova. Excuse my pronunciation. I'm sure that needs to be rectified. So Dagmar, over to you. Can we unmute Dagmar, please?
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yes. Thank you very much. I wonder whether some NGOs, non-governmental organizations, can help in the struggle of other specialists, like we psychologists, when we have support in the grassroots, it's very good also to share the same interest in helping families. And some years ago, as I suggested in my question, we had very good collaboration with the Swedish non-NGO, Gentle Separation, it was the name. And those were mostly fathers who were caring so that the child could get into the shared parenting and develop while having both parents equally or mostly equally. So now I wonder if this NGO is still existing or not. Of course, that I could have also other issues to suggest, but I imagine that the name Malin Bergstrom is also very famous from the family therapy conferences, and I think that maybe I've already met with our honorable speaker. So I'm very happy, and then thank Malin very much for her presentation, and just to tell me the information if this NGO still works or not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dagmar. I'm sorry, but I don't recognize it. I have no idea. And I can't even think of what. No, I don't know about it. I'm really sorry.
Okay, so maybe they finished. Maybe they finished already, because it's really a lot of years. And my next maybe question coming from this is also that the shared parenting is one point, but sometimes, as we have the experience with divorced families, what it is the case, usually mothers who don't want their spouses to meet with children, and they even extend it to other members of the former family, like extended families, like grandparents and aunts and uncles, etc., which is really devastating for the psychology of the child, and and children are then very, very sad, and they really are losing resources, as Malin suggested already in her presentation, that not only that you are losing the parent, but with him or her sometimes you can lose also other members of this extended family. Thank you.
I have since 18 months been so particularly interested in that, Dagmar, because I got my first grandchild 18 months ago. And it's just, I mean, it's as life-changing as it was to have children of your own. And you really, you get humble when thinking about how people around a child, what we could mean as a family. It's really a wonderful experience, and it kind of expands the way I think about young children's needs.
True. So children are suffering, but also the other members of the family are suffering too. Not only parents that broke, that separated or divorced.
Yeah, we find that also in Shared Parenting Scotland, particularly in our support meetings. Increasingly, we have other people that are involved coming to the support meetings, grandmothers, grandfathers, sisters, new partners. So there's much more of a feeling that the child is being raised by a village, or certainly wider sort of family units, which is a positive thing. But also equally, when there's no contact being allowed, then also that's a bereavement for all those people as well.
One of the main attachment researchers, Marinus van Isendorn, do you know him? He's Dutch. He's been doing research on children's attachment relations for, I don't know, 40 years or something. He described it as a net of attachment relations around a child, and I think that is such a nice picture. And it doesn't have to be a nice net. It could be messy, but it's still a net. And something else I got to think about was we had an American professor and researchers visiting Sweden last winter, James McHale, he's called, and he's been doing research on co-parenting relationships for many, many years. And he had such a simple little exercise that he did with people around a child. He was just drawing a little child in the middle, and then he made the co-parents or the people around the child draw themselves as circles around it, and then make a straight line or a dotted line or so, and then discuss this net of attachment relations around the child. And I think that was such a nice picture, because it really put the child in the middle, and it took away all the discussions about parental rights.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Roseanne Cubitt. Roseanne, would you like to come on next?
Hi there. Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, no, I was interested really at a practical level about how the shared parenting works. Is it typically a week with one parent and then a week with the other parent, or do they split the week? We work as family mediators a lot with parents trying to negotiate arrangements following separation, and we encourage that joint involvement in co-parenting, but very often it would be one parent's work commitments or where they live in relation to the school that would influence, even if in principle they want to share the parenting more equally, some of those practical things get in the way. And so some of it is cultural and structural, the issues that you've talked about there, but I was just quite interested to know how it actually works for most people.
I would say in general with school age children, it would be 1 week in each home. For younger children, they would typically have 2 + 2 + 3 days, something like that. So they have every second weekend and then change homes twice a week, except for the weekends.
So
2
they
+
must
2.
they must live near to schools then, I guess, for the children presumably stay at the same school.
But as I showed you, when the trend of having children in shared parenting has brought along an increase in living close to each other. So that has happened because people realize that they need to be close to each other or close to the school or preschool to be able to have these arrangements. And that is just something in the attitude. When this became the norm, it has brought along this closeness in homes.
It's one of those chicken and egg things, isn't it? How do we change?
Yeah, and we don't really know, but that's just my guess.
Yeah.
And when it comes to work life, it is also a matter of, children, they adapt to family circumstances, but what is important, you know that, Rosanna, probably, but it's that what they need is a stability, and they must be able to foresee what will my week be like, who is going to pick me up, and when am I going to move. So they need a stability in that, but the stability could involve moving houses every second day or whatever, but there needs to be a stability so they know. And we have been making material and teaching these things to people who are giving advice to separated parents. They could, of course, they need to sort out their schedule so it works with their adult lives, but there are tricks that they can use to make it feel stable for children. Like a little red ribbon around the arm on young children. Every time dad is coming to pick you up, you have this red ribbon, so you remember, okay, it's dad day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's most of the questions. I'm just going to sort of reiterate. There's a couple of things obviously in the Q&A that I just want to just sort of underline. And so one I think is from Michael Bohoni, and he's really interested, I think, in the app, in the Varan Veka app, and maybe the possibility to translate that into German and Italian. And I saw that Dagmar was also interested in that as well. So there's obviously conversations to be had coming out of this session today. And then just to sort of like say to Joan that we'll get in contact with her, and then if she can send the materials that she wants to be passed out, we'll do that after this session as well. So I don't know if there's anything else from anybody else. Last minute question. Anything else? No. So I think it's really then just up to me to say, I think it's been a really fantastic session and very, very interesting. Malin, I don't know whether you want to say anything else in addition to your presentation. Last thoughts?
No, I was thinking about something you mentioned about your work, Claire, about supporting co-parenting skills and communication skills between parents. My experience is that just to make a difference between your love relationship and your co-parenting relationship, it's really fruitful to discuss that with parents. And to if you manage to make parents understand how much their loyalty to each other means for the child's health and well-being, that really makes a difference. I think that's one of the things that I have learned from the Elvis Project and our studies. I hadn't thought much about it before, but I find that really fascinating. And I think that is something we as professionals could work with already before the child is born, actually. And that's what James McHale does in the States. They work with expecting couples, teaching them co-parenting skills and loyalty. I think that's really an interesting way forward. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I think one of the things that I always hear, I work also as a coach, actually, with some of our training. I've got background in mediation and counseling, and I quite often hear people say, I wish I'd known this, like, before, so I think actually that sort of proactive approach is really, really important. Okay, so
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks to everyone who came.
Welcome. You're very welcome. It's been absolutely fascinating. And just a little bit of admin at the end, we'll email you a copy of Malin's slides and some further links, including those that are going to be sent through by Joan. And the talks will be available on the website, on the Shared Parenting website really soon. So if there were other people that people know were interested in it, they'll be able to access it there. And please join us for future sessions as we keep a roaming brief around the world and looking at other countries as well. And there's a lot more to explore. And really, thank you so much to Malin again, and to Harper McLeod for their support. And also, I'd just like a small thank you to Fraser. Fraser is our tech guy, so none of this happens without him. And it seems to be fairly glitch-free, so thank you very much.
Can I just add something? Sorry.
Of course.
I just wanted to say, if someone is interested in our research, everything is published open access. So you can access it if you just Google, for example, my name, or I think in my slides, there is some of our studies is included in one of the last slides. And you can just Google our names and shared parenting or joint physical custody, and then you will find our newer work as well. Thank you.
That's great. Well, just to highlight that next week we've got 2 sessions, both starting at 3 p.m. UK time. One on Wednesday, we have Laura Kitsmaker from the Netherlands to talk about the online systems they've developed for making planned parenting, and with a Scottish response from Roseanne Cubitt, who's actually here today, from Relationship Scotland. And on Thursday, we have Elizabeth Hyde from Canada talking about how parenting coordinators can work with parents to support them to carry out agreements with a Scottish response from Judith Higson from Scullion Law. Speakers still to come, as I said, from Israel and the US. See our website for details and booking arrangements. So thanks again for attending, and also for giving us your very interesting and lively questions. Thanks very much. Have a great day. Bye, guys.